In this video, I'm going to show you the different parts of a vintage Koh-I-Noor technical pen and how to fill it. This one is in excellent condition. It's got very little wear to it. This is these pens. I've used Koh-I-Noor technical pens for over 30 years, and they are, whether they're vintage pens or whether they're the new pens, they are just reliable for ink flow and for dependability. I'm going to first take the cap off. And these are, they look like fountain pens, but they're actually technical pens. This one has its original nib, and you'll see that it's kind of, they call it a tulip-shaped nib. And I'm going to take that out using a Nib Key. You want the thicker part on the bottom to go on the bottom of the key of the nib. It'll fit on there, and you just gently turn that to unscrew the nib. Now, when you're filling it, you don't need to do that. You would need to do that if you need to clean the nib. This is a very small size. It's one that certain inks you can't put into it because they're too thick. They're too pigmented. But this one I've cleaned. You might be able to tell it's got a little bit of fluid on it. So that is what the nib section looks like. On this particular one, there is not a metal bar around the bottom to keep the weight in place. The weight is kept in place with this plastic shield. Then you have the pen barrel, which looks like this, and the bottom of the barrel unscrews to reveal a turning knob. Those are the different parts of the pen. That's as far as you need to go for taking it apart. This knob is how you fill the pen at the bottom. So if you're going to fill the pen, you have the nib in place. I use an ultrasonic cleaner that you can buy. Koh-I-Noor used to make them, but you can also buy them made for jewelry. To clean jewelry, you can. They're not very expensive. And when I have a nib that's clogged, I will just put it right in an ultrasonic cleaner, and usually one setting, one run through works fine to clean it. So my nib is in place. I've taken the bottom cap off. Whoops. And what you want to do is you want to turn this knob all the way to the left before you fill the pen with ink. This is a vintage bottle of Rotring Artist Color acrylic ink. It's no longer made. It's highly pigmented, but it's also extremely finely ground. So if you can ever come across vintage bottles, it's worth picking up. And to fill the pen, you have turned the knob all the way to the left. You put the pen all the way in the ink bottle until the nib is hitting ink. And you really want to be up to here. And I'm not going to use this ink, and I'll tell you why. This is too much pigment for this size pen. That is the color I need, and this is the size I need. And this is perhaps the one drawback. If all of that pigment towards the bottom of the ink, and I have shaken the bottle, even though it's finely ground, that's going to be too thick for this pen. So what I will do in this case is make my own ink the same color and make it just a little bit more transparent. I'll use this as a base. I'll dilute it with water. I may add another brown. I write my own recipes for different ink colors so that I keep track of how I make each color using base inks like that. Koh-I-Noor makes a drawing ink, which is another very good light, fast, and somewhat waterproof drawing ink. And the other ink that I use is the FW brand acrylic artist ink. And you see, so there's a little bit of a problem. When you get halfway down on the bottle, you have to make sure the nib goes at least to here into the ink to fill the pen. Now, this yellow is deep enough. There is enough in this bottle to do it with. So I will use the yellow. And I usually have pen wiper cloths everywhere. But let me just find one to wipe this other ink off. The problem with using anything that's too pigmented in a very small nib size is that it's just going to keep clogging. It's just not going to work. I don't use, like, flesh tint. FW makes an flesh tint ink. I don't use that in anything smaller than a 0.18 size nib. So this is better. It's still not quite deep enough, but it'll probably fill. I've got it in there, and I had already turned the knob all the way to the left. I now turn it all the way to the right. And what that will do is fill the pen. And see, you can see where the ink needs to hit this area here in order to fill. You put the pen back in the ink, turn it to the left again, and then turn it to the right again. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, you will have filled the pen to capacity. Now, like I said, this pen is in excellent condition. It looks like it's never been used, or used very few times. Once you're done filling it, you want to put this cap back on the end so that you don't lose the cap. A lot of times when I've come across these pens, the vintage pens, the pens work great, but the nibs are broken or missing. And I have an example of one of those. This is a size 0. And these pens, as great and reliable as they are, they fade with time. The newer pens tend to turn yellow. The older pens tend to fade. See how this is all faded on the barrel? But the pen still works great once I put a new nib in it. This is a nib just like the one I just showed you, except this is missing. It looks like the at least the bracket that holds the weight in place. So I couldn't get this nib to fill, and I don't fool around with them for too long because they're very delicate. Once they're gone, they're kind of gone. And what I will do with that size pen is put a modern nib in it. That's what a modern nib looks like. They're the same size. It'll fit in the older pen. So I will just get a replacement nib for this vintage pen. And I save the old nibs simply because it's nice to have a pen with its original equipment. The one that I just filled, that I put ink in, I was lucky enough that it came with the original box. They used to come in a box like this. The original instructions on how to fill it, and the original vintage nib key. And the nib key is slightly different from a modern nib key, which I have over here. There's a little bit more of a difference than just the color. The interior shape here is different, and so if you can find these with the original pens, that's always a great idea. And I've been a pen and ink artist for over 30 years, and I've always used Koh-I-Noor pens for very finely detailed pen and ink work that I have kind of my own way of doing it. And I love these pens. You can find them used. They're not hard to clean. They're not hard to take care of. And there are replacement nibs available. if you should need a replacement nib. Plus, they're nice to use. They're nice to hold. The new pens are nice too. I mean, these are your standard technical pens, and they function like it. The older pens that hold more like a fountain pen are just as nice and just as reliable. After filling any pen, here's a modern pen, and the camera shot got a little blurry. I don't know why. You want to use, this is a bulb syringe that Koh-I-Noor makes. They're fairly expensive, but they last a long time. They're around $20, $22. And the reason that they're different from, say, another bulb syringe is that they have this fixture at the end that fits right onto a nib, like that. And you can use that after you fill a pen. You can put it right on there, and it'll start the ink flow for you. It's also useful for flushing flushing fluid out of a nib if you need to do that.